I decided to do my photo story assignment on the Science Central place here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Science Central is located on 1950 North Clinton Street, and it first opened in 1995. This science center doesn't really have one particular founder. In fact, people such as elected officials and Fort Wayne community members were some of the many people that played a role in the opening of Science Central 23 years ago. The Science Center is also the only hands-on science center in Northeast Indiana. Unlike many other science museums, guests can play with and or touch the exhibits, and they are all in plain sight for attendees of Science Central. Science Central features approximately 200 small exhibits in which guests can learn about many types of sciences such as astronomy, chemistry, oceanography, and meteorology. Guests can also be informed on sciences such as physics, biology, and geology. For the remainder of my photo story, I will briefly elaborate on some of their exhibits. This first exhibit is titled Iron Meteorite. The exhibit falls under the astronomy science, and the general gist of the exhibit is to show that the objects that come down from space are more than just rocks. This next exhibit is titled Mist Machine. It falls under the meteorology science, and the general gist of the exhibit is about clouds, cloud formations, and how clouds are made out of water droplets, as illustrated by the droplets around the rims and the mist coming out of the machine. This next exhibit is titled Angular Acceleration. It falls under the physics science, and the general gist of this exhibit is the illustration of how wheels will roll at varied speeds dependent on the distance of its mass from the center of the wheel. The closer the mass is to the center of the wheel, the faster it'll spin, and vice versa. This next exhibit is titled Balance Lever. It falls under the physics science, and the gist of it is the illustration of the balance of weight. The lever will lean left or right depending on the weight balance on each side. As can be seen, the lever will lean to whichever side has the most weight on it. This next exhibit is titled Bounce. This exhibit falls under the physics type of science. When any of the balls are bounced on the ground, they will return to their normal height because of elasticity. This next exhibit is titled Color Perception. It falls under the physics science, and the general gist of the exhibit is to show how different objects look with different types of color hues or filters. This next exhibit is titled Magnetic Ring. It falls under the physics science, and the general gist of it is to illustrate how magnetic forces work. Pulling the ring up or pushing it down is a simulation of force. Obviously, these type of forces are magnetic forces. This next exhibit is titled Parachute Drop. It falls under the physics science, and the exhibit is meant to show how gravity works in pulling a parachute down to the ground. This next exhibit is titled Pin Table. It falls under the physics science and illustrates the concept of distribution of force. If one pin is stuck in the front of someone's hand, the force will only be felt in that one spot. If 10 pins are stuck in a hand, the force will be distributed and felt amongst those 10 spots where the pins were, and so on and so forth. This next exhibit is titled Bicycle Generation. It falls under the biology science, and the gist of it is about the connection of watts and calories burned in relation to speed. The faster someone rides, the more watts generated and calories burned, and vice versa. This next exhibit is titled Skeleton Bike. It falls under the biology science, and the general gist of it is the illustration of how someone's joints move when they ride a bike. And finally, the last exhibit I will elaborate on is titled Fluorescence. It falls under the geology science, and the gist of this exhibit is the illustration of how liquids will look in regular lighting and ultraviolet lights. Exhibits such as the ones talked about exhibit how relevant many different sciences are in our everyday lives.